The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the early preparations below. Staff members moved quietly across the grounds, their usual cheerful chatter replaced by respectful whispers. Today was different from any other day in the kingdom's recent history. Today would mark the beginning of a farewell that would touch the hearts of millions around the world. Princess Isabella had been awake since before dawn, sitting in her favorite chair beside their bedroom window. She held a cup of tea that had long grown cold, her delicate fingers wrapped around the porcelain as if it could somehow anchor her to this moment. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she had learned over the years that strength often came from accepting rather than fighting the inevitable. The couple had been inseparable for 15 years, their love story one that had captured the imagination of people everywhere. From their first meeting at a charity gala in London to their fairy tale wedding that was watched by over 2 billion people worldwide, Alexander and Isabella had become symbols of hope, grace, and enduring love. Their partnership had weathered political storms, personal challenges, and the constant scrutiny that came with royal life, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. 3 months earlier, Isabella had received news that would change everything. A rare genetic condition, dormant for years, had begun to manifest in ways that would progressively affect her ability to fulfill her royal duties. The palace medical team, along with specialists from around the world, had been unanimous in their assessment. While not immediately life-threatening, the condition would require Isabella to step back from public life and eventually relocate to a specialized treatment facility in Switzerland, where she could receive the best possible care while living as normal a life as circumstances would allow. The decision had not come easily. Late into many nights, Alexander and Isabella had sat together, exploring every possible alternative. Could they modify her schedule? Could they bring the treatment to her? Could they find a way to maintain their life together while managing her condition? Each conversation ended the same way, with a painful recognition that love sometimes meant making the hardest choice, even when every fiber of your being rebelled against it. Alexander turned from the window as Isabella entered the study, her morning routine complete. Even facing the most difficult day of their lives, she moved with the grace that had made her beloved by millions. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a navy dress that had always been one of his favorites. She had chosen it deliberately, he knew, as a small gift to him on this impossible day. "The children are having breakfast," Isabella said softly, referring to their 2 young sons, Prince James, aged 8, and Prince William, aged 6. James asked again why we all seemed so sad lately. I told him we would explain everything together after lunch. Alexander crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. They were cold, despite the warmth of the morning, and he rubbed them gently between his palms. "How are you feeling about today?" he asked, though he could see the answer in her eyes. "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh that held no humor. "Grateful, heartbroken, ready to get it over with. All at once, really." They had decided to make their announcement publicly before Isabella's departure, wanting their supporters to hear the news directly from them rather than through speculation or leaked reports. The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon, followed by a public appearance where they would meet with some of the charitable organizations they had supported together over the years. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment. David, Alexander's private secretary, entered with his usual respectful demeanor, though even he could not entirely hide the emotion of the day. "Your Highnesses, the final preparations for this afternoon are complete. The press pool has been assembled, and security briefings are finished. Is there anything else you need before we begin?" Isabella squeezed Alexander's hand. "I think I'd like to walk through the gardens once more," she said. "Just the 2 of us, before everything else begins." Alexander nodded to David, who quietly withdrew. The palace gardens had always been Isabella's sanctuary, a place where she could find peace away from the demands of royal life. They had spent countless hours there together, from early morning walks to late evening conversations on the garden bench beneath the old oak tree that had stood on the grounds for over 200 years. As they stepped outside, Isabella slipped her hand into Alexander's arm, a gesture so natural and familiar that it spoke of years of shared experiences. The gardens were in full spring bloom, with roses beginning to show their color and the lavender releasing its gentle fragrance into the warming air. They walked slowly, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. "Do you remember our 3rd date?" Isabella asked as they paused beside the fountain at the garden center. "When you brought me here for the first time?" Alexander smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. You were so nervous about meeting my parents. You spent 20 minutes asking me questions about proper protocol, and then you charmed them completely within 5 minutes of walking into the room. Your mother told me later that she knew immediately that you were serious about me, Isabella continued. She said she had never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at me that day. I still look at you that way, Alexander said quietly, turning to face her. I always will. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. They had agreed that morning that they would not cry during their walk. There would be time for tears later, but this moment was for remembering and storing away every detail to carry with them through the difficult months ahead. They continued through the gardens, visiting each of their favorite spots. The rose arbor where Alexander had first told her he loved her. The small greenhouse where Isabella had started her herb garden for the palace kitchen. The children's play area where they had spent countless afternoons pushing James and William on swings and helping them build elaborate sandcastles. At each stop, they shared quiet memories, their conversation flowing easily despite the weight of the day. This was how they had always communicated best, with an understanding that went beyond words. Even in the early days of their relationship, they had discovered an ability to be comfortable together in silence, to share thoughts and feelings without always having to voice them. As they walked, palace staff continued their preparations around them. Windows were being cleaned to perfection, flowers arranged and rearranged, every detail attended to with the care that royal occasions demanded. But Isabella and Alexander moved through it all as if in their own private world, stealing these last peaceful moments together. I want you to know, Isabella said as they sat together on their favorite bench, that leaving doesn't mean I love you any less. If anything, it means I love you more than I ever thought possible. Alexander took her hand, studying the wedding ring that had never left her finger since their wedding day. I know, he said simply. And I want you to know that supporting your decision doesn't mean I'm not breaking apart inside. It just means I love you enough to want what's best for you, even when it destroys me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a family of ducks make their way across the small pond at the far end of the gardens. The normalcy of the scene stood in sharp contrast to the extraordinary circumstances of their own lives. But there was something comforting about witnessing the simple, ongoing rhythms of life. The children will be all right, Isabella said, though she seemed to be reassuring herself as much as Alexander. James is so much like you already, so responsible and thoughtful. And William has that wonderful ability to find joy in everything, just like your sister used to when we first met her. They'll miss you terribly, Alexander replied. We all will. But you're right, they'll be all right. We'll make sure of that. Isabella had spent weeks creating detailed notes for Alexander about the children's routines, preferences, and needs. She had recorded bedtime stories for them to play when they missed her voice, and she had worked with the palace staff to ensure that their lives would continue as smoothly as possible despite her absence. It was typical of her thoughtfulness, her determination to care for others even as she faced her own challenges. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above them, and Isabella closed her eyes, breathing deeply. I want to remember this, she said. The way the air smells, the sound of the fountain, the feeling of your hand in mine. I want to remember all of it. Alexander brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. So do I, he whispered. As the morning progressed, they knew their private time was drawing to a close. Soon, the demands of the day would take over, and they would need to transform from a husband and wife sharing a quiet moment into the prince and princess that the world expected to see. But, for now, they simply sat together, drawing strength from each other's presence. Your Highnesses? David's voice came from a respectful distance. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for the briefing with the communications team. Alexander and Isabella exchanged a look, and she nodded slightly. They rose from the bench together, Isabella smoothing her dress and checking that her hair was still properly arranged. Even in this most private of moments, she remained conscious of the standards expected of her position. As they walked back toward the palace, Isabella paused to look back at the gardens one more time. Alexander followed her gaze, understanding that she was saying goodbye not just to a place, but to a way of life that had defined her for 15 years. Ready? He asked gently. Isabella squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, transforming before his eyes into the princess that the public knew and loved. Ready, she replied, and together they walked back into the palace to face whatever lay ahead. The communications team was waiting in the blue drawing room, along with representatives from the various charities and organizations that would be affected by Isabella's departure. The mood in the room was respectfully solemn, everyone understanding the gravity of the situation while maintaining the professionalism that royal occasions demanded. As they entered the room, Alexander and Isabella automatically moved into their public roles, greeting each person individually and ensuring that everyone felt acknowledged and appreciated. Even facing the most difficult day of their lives, they remained committed to the courtesy and consideration that had always defined their approach to royal duty. The briefing covered the logistics of the afternoon's events, the timing of each segment, and the key messages they wanted to convey. Isabella had insisted that their statement emphasize gratitude rather than sadness, focusing on the privilege they had shared in serving together and their continued commitment to the causes they cared about, even if that service would take different forms in the future. As the morning meetings continued, Alexander found himself watching Isabella with a new intensity, trying to memorize every expression, every gesture, every inflection of her voice. Soon, these moments would become memories, and he wanted to ensure that he captured every detail to sustain him through the difficult months ahead. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the throne room as palace staff made final adjustments to the podium where Alexander and Isabella would make their announcement. Camera crews had been setting up since early morning, their equipment carefully positioned to capture every moment while respecting the solemnity of the occasion. Representatives from news organizations around the world had gathered, understanding that they were about to witness something unprecedented in royal history. Isabella stood before her bedroom mirror, making final touches to her appearance with the help of her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, who had been with her since the early days of her marriage. Sarah's usually steady hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the clasp of Isabella's pearl necklace, a wedding gift from Alexander's grandmother that had become one of her signature pieces. "You look beautiful, Your Highness," Sarah said softly, though her voice caught slightly on the formal address that would soon become a memory. Isabella met Sarah's eyes in the mirror and reached back to squeeze her hand. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. These 15 years wouldn't have been the same without your friendship and support." Sarah had been more than a royal attendant. She had become a trusted confidant and friend during Isabella's transition from private citizen to princess. She had been there for the joyful moments and the challenging ones, always maintaining the perfect balance of professionalism and genuine care that had made Isabella's royal life more manageable. Down the hall, Alexander was having his own moment of preparation. His valet, Thomas, had worked with him for over 20 years, since before his marriage, and had witnessed every major moment of his adult life. Thomas moved with practiced efficiency, but Alexander could see the emotion in the older man's eyes as he made final adjustments to the prince's tie. "Sir," Thomas began, then paused, clearly struggling with words that had never been necessary before. "It's all right, Thomas," Alexander said gently. "We're all finding this difficult." Thomas nodded gratefully. "If I may say so, sir, you and Her Highness are handling this with remarkable grace. The staff all feel privileged to have served you both." Alexander clasped Thomas's shoulder briefly, a small gesture that conveyed more than words could express. The palace staff had become like an extended family over the years, and their obvious affection for both Alexander and Isabella had made the royal residence feel like a true home rather than just an official residence. A soft knock interrupted the moment. "Your Highness," came David's voice from the hallway. "It's time." Alexander took a deep breath, straightened his jacket one final time, and walked toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, Isabella emerged from her room at the same moment, and they moved toward each other with the synchronicity that had developed over years of public appearances together. "How are you feeling?" Alexander asked as they walked side by side toward the throne room. "Like I'm about to step off a cliff," Isabella replied honestly. "But also like it's time to stop prolonging the inevitable." They paused outside the throne room doors, and Alexander took Isabella's hands in his. "Whatever happens in there, whatever the reaction, we face it together, just as we always have." Isabella nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Together," she agreed. The throne room fell silent as the doors opened and Alexander and Isabella entered. The assembled press corps rose respectfully, cameras began recording, and millions of people around the world turned their attention to their television screens, sensing that they were about to witness something historic. Alexander and Isabella walked to the podium with the dignified pace that royal protocol demanded, their hands briefly touching as they took their positions. Isabella had insisted on standing rather than sitting for the announcement, wanting to face this moment head-on with all the strength she could muster. "Thank you all for being here today," Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate room. "Princess Isabella and I have asked you to join us because we have something important to share with you, and we wanted you to hear it directly from us." Isabella stepped slightly forward, her posture straight, and her voice steady as she continued. "Over the past several months, I have been working with medical specialists regarding a health condition that will require me to step back from my public duties and relocate to Switzerland for specialized treatment and care." A murmur ran through the assembled press, though they maintained the respectful silence that the occasion demanded. Isabella paused briefly, her eyes finding Alexander's for a moment of silent support before she continued. "This decision has not come easily to us, Prince Alexander, and I have explored every possible alternative, consulted with experts around the world, and spent countless hours discussing how best to move forward. Ultimately, we have concluded that the treatment I need is best provided in a specialized facility where I can receive comprehensive care while living as normal a life as circumstances permit." Alexander took over, his voice reflecting both the strength and the emotion of the moment. "I want to be absolutely clear that this decision, while difficult beyond words, is one that Princess Isabella and I have made together. She faces this challenge with the same grace and courage that she has brought to every aspect of her royal service, and I am honored to support her in whatever way I can." Isabella nodded gratefully at her husband before addressing the room once more. "I want to express my profound gratitude to all of you who have supported us over the years. Serving as your princess has been the greatest privilege of my life. The causes we have championed together, the people we have met, the experiences we have shared have enriched my life beyond measure." As she spoke, Isabella's voice remained steady, but those who knew her well could detect the slight tremor that revealed the effort it was taking to maintain her composure. Alexander moved almost imperceptibly closer, a subtle gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by the cameras or by those watching around the world. "While I will no longer be able to fulfill my public duties in the same way, my commitment to the causes we care about remains unchanged," Isabella continued. "Prince Alexander and I will work together to ensure that our charitable work continues, and I hope to contribute in whatever ways my circumstances permit." Alexander then spoke about the practical arrangements that would follow. "Princess Isabella will complete her current engagements over the next 2 weeks, after which she will travel to Switzerland. We will maintain a private residence there, and I will visit regularly while continuing my duties here at home with our sons." The mention of their children brought a brief pause to the room. Everyone present understood the additional complexity that this separation would create for the young princes, who had grown up in the public eye as beloved members of the royal family. "Prince James and Prince William are, naturally, our primary concern during this transition," Alexander continued. "We have worked carefully to ensure that their lives will continue with as much stability and normalcy as possible. They will remain here with me, attending the same schools and maintaining their usual activities and friendships." Isabella added, "Our sons have been remarkable in their understanding and support. While this separation will be difficult for all of us, we are confident that the love and stability they have always known will continue, simply in a different form." As the formal announcement concluded, Alexander and Isabella opened the floor to a limited number of questions from the assembled press. The questions were respectful and thoughtful, focusing on the timeline of Isabella's departure, the nature of her ongoing involvement with their charitable work, and the arrangements for the children. Throughout the question period, Alexander and Isabella demonstrated the partnership that had defined their public life together. When one spoke, the other listened attentively, occasionally adding details or clarification. Their mutual support was evident in every interaction, from the way they looked at each other to the subtle gestures of encouragement they exchanged. One reporter asked about their personal feelings regarding the separation, and Isabella responded with characteristic honesty. "This is undoubtedly the most difficult challenge we have faced as a couple. But our marriage has always been built on the foundation of wanting the best for each other, even when that requires personal sacrifice. That foundation remains as strong as ever." Alexander added, "Love sometimes means making choices that break your heart in service of what you know is right. That's what we're doing here, and we're doing it together, even though it means we'll be apart." As the press conference drew to a close, Alexander and Isabella thanked the assembled media for their respectful coverage and their understanding during this difficult time. They requested privacy for their family during the transition period, while acknowledging that their public roles meant that some level of attention was inevitable and understandable. The formal announcement completed, Alexander and Isabella made their way to the palace's main reception hall, where representatives from their various charitable organizations had gathered. This was perhaps the most personal part of the day for Isabella, as these were the people with whom she had worked most closely during her years of royal service. The reception hall buzzed with quiet conversation as they entered, but the room fell silent as Isabella began to speak. Unlike the formal press conference, this gathering felt more intimate, despite the presence of cameras documenting the event for posterity. "I wanted to meet with all of you personally," Isabella began, "because each of your organizations has become a part of my life's work. The homeless shelter where I served meals every Christmas morning. The children's hospital where I read stories on Thursday afternoons. The literacy program that has seen thousands of children discover the joy of reading. These are not just commitments to me. They are relationships that have shaped who I am." As Isabella spoke, several of the assembled representatives wiped away tears. Margaret Thompson, who had worked with Isabella on youth literacy programs for over a decade, later described the moment as seeing someone say goodbye to the work that had defined her soul. Isabella moved through the room, greeting each representative personally, thanking them for their dedication, and discussing how their important work would continue. She had spent weeks preparing for these conversations, working with palace staff to ensure that each organization would have the ongoing support they needed, even in her absence. Alexander stood nearby, watching his wife demonstrate once again the genuine care and personal investment that had made her such an effective advocate for the causes they supported. He had always admired her ability to connect with people on a personal level, to make each person feel valued and heard, regardless of their position or background. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had worked with Isabella on mental health initiatives, approached the princess with obvious emotion. "Your Highness, I want you to know that the work we've done together has literally saved lives. The awareness you've brought to mental health issues has made it possible for thousands of people to seek help without shame." Isabella hugged Dr. Williams warmly, another departure from usual royal protocol that characterized this extraordinary day. "Thank you for letting me be part of that work," Isabella replied. "Please don't let it end just because I can't be here in person. Promise me that you'll keep fighting for those who need your help." Similar conversations took place throughout the room, each one a small farewell that added to the weight of the day. Isabella's assistant had prepared detailed notes about ongoing projects and commitments, ensuring that nothing would fall through the cracks during the transition period. James Morrison, who had coordinated Isabella's work with veterans organizations, presented her with a small wooden box. "This contains letters from some of the veterans you've helped over the years," he explained. "They wanted you to take something with you to remind you of the difference you've made." Isabella accepted the box with visible emotion, holding it carefully, as if it contained precious treasure. "I'll treasure these always," she said. "Please tell them that serving our veterans has been one of my greatest honors." As the afternoon progressed, Alexander and Isabella moved together through the gathered representatives, their teamwork evident even in these final public moments together. When Isabella seemed overwhelmed by a particularly emotional conversation, Alexander would step in with a gentle comment or question that gave her a moment to compose herself. When Alexander struggled to find the right words for a difficult topic, Isabella would seamlessly continue the thought, demonstrating the understanding that had developed between them over 15 years of marriage and royal service. The evening air carried a subtle chill as Alexander and Isabella finally retreated to their private quarters after the emotionally draining day of public appearances. The formal events were complete, but the hardest part still lay ahead: the private conversations with family, the personal goodbyes, and the final preparations for Isabella's departure. Their sons, Prince James and Prince William, were waiting in the family sitting room, having spent the day with their tutors and nannies while their parents fulfilled their public obligations. James, at 8 years old, had developed an unusual maturity that often surprised adults, while 6-year-old William possessed an infectious enthusiasm that had always been able to brighten even the most difficult days. "Mummy, Daddy," William called out as they entered the room, running to embrace them both with the unconscious ease of a child who had never known a world without unconditional love and security. James approached more cautiously, his serious expression revealing that he understood more about the day's events than his younger brother. Isabella knelt down to William's level, gathering him into her arms while Alexander placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. This conversation had been weighing on both parents' minds all day, knowing that explaining the situation to their children would be one of their most challenging tasks. "We need to talk with you both about something very important," Isabella began, her voice taking on the gentle tone she had always used when discussing serious matters with the boys. "You know that Mummy hasn't been feeling completely well lately, and that's why I've been seeing different doctors." James nodded solemnly. He had noticed the increased number of medical appointments, the hushed conversations between his parents, and the subtle changes in household routines that had marked the past few months. William, however, looked puzzled, his young mind struggling to understand how his seemingly healthy mother could be unwell. "The doctors have found a way to help me feel better," Isabella continued, "but it means I need to go to a special place in Switzerland where they have treatments that aren't available anywhere else. It's a bit like going to a special school, but for grown-ups who need medical help." "How long will you be gone?" James asked quietly, the question that Alexander and Isabella had been dreading. Alexander knelt beside Isabella, wanting to share the burden of this conversation. "We don't know exactly, James. It could be a very long time. But what we do know is that Mummy and I will always be your parents, no matter where we are. That will never change." William's lower lip began to tremble as the implications of the conversation began to penetrate his young understanding. "But I want Mummy to stay here," he said, his voice rising with the beginning of tears. "Why can't the doctors come here instead?" Isabella pulled William closer, her own eyes filling with tears that she had been holding back all day. "Oh, sweetheart, I want to stay here with you too. More than anything else in the world. But sometimes, when people love each other very much, they have to do things that are hard because they know it's the right thing to do." Alexander added, "You know how sometimes you have to eat vegetables even when you'd rather have ice cream, because vegetables help you grow strong and healthy? This is like that, but much bigger and much harder." James, with the startling insight that children sometimes possess, looked directly at his mother and asked, "Are you scared, Mummy?" Isabella paused, considering how honest to be with her young son. She had always believed in treating the boys with respect and honesty, adapted to their age and understanding. "Yes, James, I am scared. I'm scared about leaving you and Daddy and William. I'm scared about being in a new place where I don't know anyone. But I'm also brave, because I know that this is what I need to do to get better, and because I know that you and William and Daddy will be brave too." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Alexander and Isabella patiently answering their son's questions and providing reassurance about the practical aspects of their daily lives. They explained that the boys would continue living in their same rooms, attending the same schools, and maintaining their regular activities. They discussed how they would communicate while Isabella was away, including video calls and letters. William, with the adaptability of youth, seemed to gradually accept the situation as his parents explained the specifics. "Will you still be able to read me bedtime stories?" he asked, and Isabella promised to record stories that he could listen to whenever he missed her voice. James, however, remained troubled by aspects of the situation that went beyond the practical arrangements. "Will people say mean things about our family?" he asked, demonstrating an awareness of public attention that came with his royal upbringing. Alexander addressed this concern with careful honesty. "Some people might not understand why we're making this choice, James. But the people who truly matter, the people who care about us, will understand that sometimes families have to face difficult challenges together, even when it means being apart." Isabella added, "And you should never feel ashamed or embarrassed about our situation. Daddy and I are proud of how our family handles challenges with love and honesty. You can be proud of that too." As the evening progressed, the family gradually shifted from serious conversation to more normal activities. They played William's favorite card game, and Isabella helped James with a school project about the solar system that was due the following week. These ordinary moments took on extraordinary significance, each one becoming a memory to be treasured during the separation ahead. At bedtime, both boys requested that both parents participate in their bedtime routine, rather than the usual alternating schedule they had maintained. Isabella read stories to William, while Alexander helped James organize his school materials for the next day, and then they switched roles, ensuring that each boy had individual time with both parents. After the children were settled for the night, Alexander and Isabella finally had their first truly private moment since the day began. They sat together in their bedroom, the formal clothes of the day replaced by comfortable pajamas, the public personas set aside in favor of the simple reality of a husband and wife facing an impossible situation. How did we get through today? Isabella asked, leaning against Alexander's shoulder as they sat on the edge of their bed. I honestly don't know, Alexander replied, his arm tightening around her. Every time I thought I might break down, I looked at you being so strong, and somehow I found the strength to keep going. Isabella laughed softly, though the sound held little humor. I was thinking the exact same thing about you. We've become quite a team at holding each other up, haven't we? They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the events of the day and the reality that their time together was drawing to a close. The palace around them was quieter than usual, as staff members moved through their evening routines with the subdued energy that had characterized the entire day. I keep thinking about tomorrow morning, Isabella said eventually. About waking up and having breakfast with the boys and knowing that we only have a few more days of normal mornings together. Alexander understood exactly what she meant. The normal routines that they had taken for granted for years had suddenly become precious and finite. Every shared meal, every conversation, every moment of ordinary family life now carried the weight of being among their last for an indefinite period. We'll make the most of the time we have, Alexander said. No unnecessary meetings, no obligations that aren't absolutely essential. Just family time. Isabella nodded, grateful for his understanding. I want to go to William's school play on Thursday. I know it's just a small production, but he's been practicing his lines for weeks, and I can't bear the thought of missing it. Of course we'll go, Alexander assured her. We'll go to everything. William's play, James's football match on Saturday, the family dinner at your sister's house on Sunday. All of it. They began to make plans for Isabella's final week at home, carefully considering each commitment and event. Some obligations would need to be canceled or postponed, but they were determined to maintain as much normalcy as possible while also creating special memories to sustain them through the separation ahead. I've been thinking about letters, Isabella said. I want to write letters to the boys for important occasions that I'll miss. Birthdays, Christmas, the first day of school each year. I want them to have something from me for those moments. Alexander felt his throat tighten at the thought of Isabella, alone in Switzerland, writing birthday letters for children she couldn't hold. That's a beautiful idea, he managed. They'll treasure those letters. Isabella had already begun composing the letters in her mind, trying to imagine how James and William would change and grow during her absence. How could she offer guidance and support from a distance? How could she remain a meaningful presence in their daily lives despite the physical separation? I want you to promise me something, Isabella said, turning to face Alexander directly. Promise me that you won't put your own life on hold while I'm gone. I know you'll be focused on the boys and your royal duties, but I need to know that you're also taking care of yourself, that you're finding ways to be happy. Alexander started to protest, but Isabella continued. I'm serious, Alexander. If I thought that my being away meant that you would just exist rather than live, it would make everything so much harder. I need to know that you're still playing tennis with David on Sundays, still reading those history books that bore me to tears, still laughing with your friends. How can you ask me to be happy when you're not here? Alexander asked, his voice breaking slightly. Because that's what love is, Isabella replied simply. Love means wanting the best possible life for the person you love, even when you can't be part of it in the way you want to be. Promise me, Alexander. Promise me you'll find ways to be happy. Alexander pulled her closer, understanding the wisdom in her request, even as every part of him rebelled against the idea of happiness without her. I promise, he said quietly, but only if you promise me the same thing. Promise me that you'll find ways to be content in Switzerland, that you'll make friends and find activities that bring you joy. I promise, Isabella replied, sealing the mutual commitment with a gentle kiss. As the night deepened, they talked about practical matters, financial arrangements, communication schedules, and the logistics of Alexander's planned visits to Switzerland. They discussed how to maintain their connection across the distance, how to continue making decisions together as partners despite being apart. I've been wondering about something, Alexander said. Do you think we should consider making a public statement about our commitment to each other? Something to make it clear that this separation doesn't mean our marriage is in trouble. Isabella considered the question. Public speculation about royal marriages was inevitable, and their unusual situation would certainly fuel rumors and gossip. I think that's wise, she agreed. Maybe something we release together next week, before I leave. Something that emphasizes that this is a medical necessity, not a relationship issue. They continued planning and discussing until nearly midnight, both reluctant to end what might be their last truly private conversation for many months. Finally, exhaustion overcame their desire to prolong the evening, and they settled into bed together. As Isabella drifted toward sleep in Alexander's arms, she tried to memorize the feeling of his breathing, the warmth of his body beside hers, the security of his presence that had been a constant in her life for 15 years. Tomorrow would bring another day of preparations and farewells, but for now, she could simply be a wife lying beside her husband, drawing comfort from his nearness. Alexander remained awake long after Isabella's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. He studied her face in the dim light, trying to capture every detail to sustain him through the lonely nights ahead. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow, the peaceful expression that sleep brought to her features, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing that had been the soundtrack to his nights for so many years. Outside their window, the palace grounds were quiet, with only the occasional footstep of security personnel making their rounds. The familiar sounds of their shared life continued around them, but Alexander knew that soon, the silence of her absence would replace the comfort of her presence. For now, though, she was still here, still within reach, still the center of his world, even as that world prepared to change forever. The morning of Isabella's departure dawned gray and misty, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over the palace. Isabella had been awake since before 5 o'clock, unable to sleep as the reality of leaving finally became immediate and undeniable. She stood at the bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the gardens where she had walked with Alexander just a week earlier, when this day had still felt like a distant inevitability rather than a present reality. Alexander stirred behind her, and she felt rather than saw him wake up. After 15 years of marriage, they had developed an intimate awareness of each other's rhythms and patterns. He joined her at the window without speaking, his hand finding hers as they looked out at the grounds they both loved. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently, though they both knew that changing their minds was no longer an option. The arrangements had been made, the medical team in Switzerland was expecting her, and the children had finally accepted what was happening. "Every thought," Isabella admitted. "But not about whether this is right. Just about how much it hurts to actually do it." They had spent the previous week creating as many final memories as possible. They had attended William's school play, where he had delivered his 3 lines with such enthusiasm that the entire audience had smiled. They had cheered at James's football match, where their serious 8-year-old had scored his first goal of the season and looked immediately to the stands to ensure his parents had seen. They had hosted a quiet family dinner with Isabella's sister and Alexander's parents, maintaining conversation about ordinary topics while everyone worked to ignore the approaching farewell. Throughout the week, Isabella had completed her final royal engagements with characteristic grace and dedication. She had visited the children's hospital one last time, reading stories and bringing gifts to young patients who had no idea they were witnessing the end of an era. She had attended a board meeting for the Literacy Foundation that had been one of her primary focuses, helping to establish plans for continuing the work in her absence. Each event had carried the bittersweet quality of being both routine and historically significant. Palace staff, colleagues, and beneficiaries had all understood that they were saying goodbye to someone who had touched their lives in meaningful ways, but who was facing circumstances beyond anyone's control. "Mummy? Daddy?" William's voice came from the bedroom doorway, followed by James appearing beside his younger brother. Both boys wore their pajamas and expressions of uncertainty, having woken early on this difficult morning. Isabella and Alexander turned from the window, their hearts breaking at the sight of their son's obvious anxiety. Without hesitation, they moved to gather both boys between them on the large bed that had been the center of so many family moments over the years. "We wanted to give you something," James said quietly, producing a small wrapped package from behind his back. "William and I made it together." Isabella accepted the gift with shaking hands, carefully removing the wrapping paper to reveal a small photo album that the boys had clearly assembled themselves. The cover bore the title, "Our Family," written in James's careful script, decorated with William's colorful drawings of flowers and hearts. As Isabella opened the album, she found page after page of family photographs, some formal portraits from official occasions, others candid snapshots of everyday life. There were pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer vacations, and quiet moments at home. Each photo had been carefully selected and arranged, creating a visual story of their life together. "We wanted you to remember all the happy times," William explained earnestly. So when you're feeling sad in Switzerland, you can look at the pictures and remember that we love you. Isabella pulled both boys closer, unable to speak for several moments as she struggled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Alexander reached across to touch the album, his own eyes filling with tears at his son's thoughtful gesture. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," Isabella finally managed. "I'll treasure it always, and I'll look at it every single day to remember how lucky I am to be your mummy." James, with his characteristic seriousness, asked, "Will you add new pictures when Daddy comes to visit? So we can still be making memories together, even when we're apart?" "Absolutely," Isabella promised. "And you can send me pictures too, so I can see how you're growing and changing." They spent the next hour looking through the album together, with James and William sharing memories associated with each photograph. Isabella found herself laughing at stories she had forgotten, like the time William had insisted on wearing his superhero costume to a formal garden party, or when James had lost his first tooth during a state dinner and had been more concerned about the tooth fairy's ability to find him in a palace than about the important guests surrounding him. These ordinary family moments, preserved in snapshots and shared memories, suddenly seemed more precious than any royal occasion or state function. Isabella realized that these were the experiences that had truly defined her life over the past 15 years, the simple joys of motherhood and marriage that had given meaning to all the more formal aspects of her royal role. As breakfast time approached, the family made their way to the private dining room where they had shared countless meals together. The palace chef had prepared all of Isabella's favorite dishes, and the boys had requested pancakes with berries, a weekend tradition that they wanted to maintain even on this most unusual of mornings. The conversation during breakfast was determinately normal, focusing on the boys' school schedules for the week, Alexander's upcoming meetings, and Isabella's travel arrangements. This conscious choice to maintain ordinary patterns provided a sense of stability and normalcy that helped everyone manage the underlying emotion of the occasion. "Will you call us tonight when you get to Switzerland?" William asked between bites of pancake. "Of course," Isabella assured him. "I'll call you right before your bedtime, so we can say goodnight just like always." Alexander added, "And remember, Mummy will only be a phone call away whenever you need to talk to her. Day or night, weekends or weekdays. That won't change just because she's in a different country." After breakfast, Isabella made final preparations in their bedroom while Alexander helped the boys get ready for school. She had insisted that James and William maintain their normal Monday routine, believing that returning to familiar patterns would help them adjust to the new reality of their changed family situation. Isabella's luggage stood ready by the door, a visual reminder of the journey ahead. She had packed carefully, bringing items that would make the unfamiliar Swiss residence feel more like home. Photographs of her family, favorite books, the throw blanket that Alexander had given her for their first anniversary, and the small collection of jewelry that held special memories. Sarah, her lady-in-waiting, appeared to help with final details, though her usual efficiency was marred by obvious emotion. Over 15 years, Sarah had become far more than a palace employee. She had been Isabella's closest confidant and friend during the transition to royal life, and through all the challenges that had followed. "Everything is ready, Your Highness," Sarah reported, though her voice caught slightly on the formal address. "The car will be here at 10 o'clock, and your flight is confirmed for departure at noon." Isabella hugged Sarah warmly, another departure from usual royal protocol that had become characteristic of this extraordinary week. "Thank you for everything, Sarah. I couldn't have managed any of this without your friendship and support." "It's been my honor, Your Highness," Sarah replied, tears flowing freely now. "I'll miss you terribly." Alexander returned from taking the boys to school, and Isabella could see the strain of maintaining normalcy for their son's benefit written in every line of his face. They still had an hour before her departure, time that suddenly seemed both endless and far too brief. They walked once more through the palace rooms that had been Isabella's home for 15 years. The drawing room where she had hosted afternoon teas for charity events. The small office where she had answered correspondence and planned her public engagements. The library where she had spent countless quiet hours reading and thinking. Each room held memories that rushed back with surprising intensity. Isabella found herself remembering not just the major occasions, but the small daily moments that had made these spaces feel like home. Morning coffee in the breakfast nook while reading the newspapers. Evening conversations in the sitting room while working on needlework projects. Late-night discussions in the library when sleep eluded them both. I want you to know, Isabella said as they stood in the center of their bedroom, that these 15 years have been the happiest of my life. Even with all the challenges we've faced, even with the constant public attention, even with the restrictions that come with royal life, I would choose this life with you again, without hesitation. Alexander took her in his arms, holding her close as if he could somehow make this moment last forever. I love you, he said simply. I've loved you since the moment I met you, and I'll love you for the rest of my life, no matter where we are or what circumstances we face. They stood together in silence, each trying to memorize the feeling of being held by the other. Outside, they could hear the sounds of palace life continuing around them, but, in this moment, their world had contracted to just the two of them and the love that had sustained them through everything. A gentle knock at the door announced that their private time was ending. David entered respectfully, his usual professional demeanor not quite concealing his own emotion at the day's events. Your Highnesses, the car has arrived, he announced quietly. When you're ready. Isabella nodded, taking a deep breath and straightening her shoulders as she transformed once more into the princess that the world expected to see. She had chosen to wear a simple navy coat and dress, elegant, but understated, appropriate for a departure that was both personal and inevitably public. Alexander took her hand as they walked toward the palace entrance, where a small group of senior staff had gathered to see her off. These were the people who had worked most closely with Isabella over the years, who had witnessed her daily routines and private moments, who had become like family during her time as princess. Each farewell was brief, but meaningful. The head housekeeper who had ensured Isabella's daily comfort for 15 years. The chef who had learned all her favorite meals and dietary preferences. The security team who had protected her during countless public appearances and private outings. The administrative staff who had helped her manage the complex logistics of royal life. Isabella thanked each person individually, acknowledging their service and expressing her gratitude for their dedication. These were the people who had made her royal life possible, who had worked behind the scenes to ensure that she could fulfill her public duties while maintaining some measure of private happiness. As she approached the waiting car, Isabella could see photographers positioned at the palace gates, ready to capture this historic moment for the world to witness. She knew that these images would be studied and analyzed, that people around the globe would scrutinize her expression for signs of emotion or distress. Alexander walked beside her to the car, their hands clasped tightly together. At the car door, they paused for one final moment together, aware that cameras were recording their goodbye, but determined to make it real and personal despite the public setting. Take care of yourself, Isabella whispered, reaching up to touch Alexander's face gently. Take care of our boys. And remember that I love you, always. I love you too, Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. Be safe, be happy, and know that we'll be counting the days until we can be together again. Their kiss was gentle and lingering, a farewell that spoke of 15 years of love and the promise of reunion in an uncertain future. As they separated, both managed to smile, wanting their last image together to reflect love and hope rather than despair. Isabella stepped into the car and took her seat, turning immediately to wave at Alexander through the window. As the car began to move, she continued waving until the palace disappeared from view, marking the end of one chapter of their extraordinary love story, and the beginning of another. 3 months had passed since that gray morning when Isabella had departed for Switzerland, and the world had watched as Alexander gradually learned to navigate life without his beloved partner by his side. The initial media frenzy had eventually settled into respectful coverage of the royal family's adjustment to their new circumstances, but the public's affection and concern for both Alexander and Isabella remained strong. Alexander stood in his private study on a crisp autumn morning, reviewing correspondence that had arrived from Switzerland. Isabella's letters had become the highlight of his days, arriving twice weekly with updates about her treatment, descriptions of her new surroundings, and expressions of love that helped bridge the distance between them. Her handwriting, so familiar and dear, brought her presence into the room in a way that telephone calls, while precious, could never quite achieve. In her latest letter, Isabella described the progress she was making with her treatment and the unexpected friendships she was developing with other patients and staff members at the facility. She wrote about the small cottage on the facility grounds that had become her home, with its garden view and cozy sitting room where she spent hours reading and working on correspondence with their charitable organizations. Most importantly, She wrote about her anticipation of Alexander's next visit, scheduled for the following weekend. The children had adapted to their changed circumstances with the resilience that Alexander had hoped for but still found remarkable. James had thrown himself into his studies with increased determination, as if academic achievement could somehow make his mother proud from a distance. William had maintained his characteristic enthusiasm for life, though he now asked every few days when Mummy would be coming home, a question that Alexander answered with patient honesty about the uncertainty of the timeline. Their evening phone calls with Isabella had become a cherished family tradition. Every night at 7 o'clock, Alexander, James, and William would gather in the sitting room to speak with Isabella via video call. The boys would share the events of their days, their successes and challenges at school, and their thoughts about everything from football matches to favorite meals in the palace dining room. These calls had revealed Isabella's remarkable ability to remain a meaningful presence in her sons' daily lives despite the physical distance. She remembered their school projects, asked about their friends, and provided guidance and encouragement for their various activities. Alexander often watched his sons during these conversations, marveling at how their faces lit up when they saw their mother's image on the screen and how naturally they included her in their daily experiences. Alexander's own adjustment had been more complex. The practical aspects of single parenting, even with the extensive support of palace staff, required constant attention and energy. He had restructured his official schedule to accommodate school events and family responsibilities, often working late into the evening to complete tasks that he had previously shared with Isabella. But, beyond the logistics, Alexander found himself grappling with a profound loneliness that he had never experienced before. Isabella had been not just his wife and the mother of his children, but his closest friend, his most trusted advisor, and his constant companion through the complexities of royal life. Her absence created a void that no amount of activity or responsibility could completely fill. Yet there had been unexpected discoveries as well. Alexander had developed a deeper relationship with each of his sons, spending individual time with James and William that his previously shared parenting duties had not always allowed. He had found himself more directly involved in their daily lives, from helping with homework to attending every school event and sports match. He had also discovered reserves of strength and independence that he had not known he possessed. For years, he and Isabella had functioned as a team, each contributing their unique talents and perspectives to their shared responsibilities. Now, forced to operate independently, Alexander had developed confidence in making decisions and managing challenges on his own. The palace staff had been remarkable in their support and adaptation to the changed circumstances. David had taken on increased responsibilities, helping to coordinate Alexander's schedule while ensuring that family time remained protected. Sarah, despite her official role having ended with Isabella's departure, had remained available to help with correspondence and to serve as a connection between the family and Isabella's ongoing charitable work. Most touchingly, the British public had embraced the family situation with warmth and understanding. Letters of support arrived daily. Children's drawings for the princes filled several palace filing cabinets, and charitable donations to Isabella's favored causes had actually increased during her absence. The public seemed to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in royal history, and were responding with compassion rather than gossip or speculation. Alexander walked from his study to the boys' playroom, where James was working on a school project about European geography, while William built an elaborate castle from wooden blocks. The sight of his sons engaged in their separate activities, comfortable and secure despite their changed family circumstances, filled Alexander with pride and relief. "Daddy," William announced without looking up from his construction project, "I'm building a castle for Mummy. When she comes to visit next month, I want to show her how tall I can make the towers." Alexander knelt beside William's project, admiring the careful placement of each block. "That's wonderful, William. I think Mummy will be very impressed with your architecture skills." James looked up from his geography book and asked, "Daddy, when Mummy comes for Christmas, will everything be the same as it used to be?" The question revealed the complexity of the boys' understanding of their situation. They had accepted that their mother needed to live in Switzerland for her health, but they still hoped for returns to the familiar patterns of family life they had known before her departure. Alexander sat down between his sons, wanting to address James's question honestly while maintaining the hope and optimism that had sustained them all through the past 3 months. "Christmas will be different this year, James," because Mummy can only stay for a few days instead of being here all the time. But the most important things will be the same. We'll still be a family who loves each other. We'll still have our traditions and our favorite activities. We'll just treasure the time we have together even more than we used to. William abandoned his blocks to climb onto Alexander's lap, seeking the physical comfort that had become more important to him since Isabella's departure. Will Mummy still read us Christmas stories? He asked. Of course she will, Alexander assured him. She's been practicing reading new stories, so she'll be ready when she gets here. James returned to his geography book, but Alexander could see that his older son was still processing the conversation. After a few minutes, James spoke up again. Daddy, I think I understand why Mummy had to go to Switzerland. But I want you to know that I think you've been doing a really good job taking care of us by yourself. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion at his 8-year-old son's unexpected words of encouragement. Thank you, James. That means more to me than you know. But you know what? I think you and William have been doing a really good job too. Taking care of each other, being patient with all the changes, staying connected with Mummy even though she's far away. I'm very proud of both of you. As the afternoon progressed, Alexander found himself reflecting on the journey they had all undertaken over the past 3 months. The initial weeks had been the most difficult, filled with adjustment and grief for the life they had known. But gradually, new patterns had emerged, new sources of strength had been discovered, and new ways of being a family had developed. Isabella's weekly letters had become a cornerstone of their new routine. She wrote separately to each family member, crafting messages that addressed their individual needs and interests. For Alexander, she wrote with the intimacy of a wife who understood his deepest thoughts and feelings. For James, she wrote with the wisdom of a mother who recognized his serious nature and need for detailed explanations. For William, she wrote with playfulness and enthusiasm that matched his energetic personality. The letters revealed Isabella's own journey of adaptation and growth. Her initial messages had focused primarily on her love for her family and her sadness about the separation. But over time, her letters had begun to include descriptions of new experiences, friendships with fellow patients, and even moments of contentment and discovery in her Swiss surroundings. She had written about learning to paint watercolors in an art therapy class, about the garden she was cultivating outside her cottage, about the library where she volunteered to help other patients with reading and writing. Most remarkably, she had written about finding unexpected peace in the simplified life that her medical situation required, freed from the constant demands and public obligations that had defined her royal existence. Alexander's visits to Switzerland had become precious interludes that sustained both him and Isabella through the weeks between them. Every 6 weeks, he would travel to the facility for long weekends that allowed them to reconnect as a couple while maintaining the treatment schedule that Isabella required. Their time together during these visits had taken on an intensity and focus that was different from their married life in England. Without the distractions of royal duties, public appearances, and the complex logistics of palace life, they were able to concentrate entirely on each other and on deepening their understanding of this new phase of their relationship. They would spend hours walking through the Swiss countryside, talking about everything from their children's development to their hopes for the future. They would read together in Isabella's cottage, sharing books and ideas with the unhurried attention that had rarely been possible during their busy royal schedule. Most importantly, they would simply be together, rediscovering the fundamental compatibility and love that had brought them together 15 years earlier. Alexander had been surprised to discover that their relationship, rather than suffering under the strain of separation, had in some ways grown stronger and more intentional. Their conversations had gained depth and meaning, their time together had become more precious, and their commitment to each other had been tested and proven resilient. As evening approached and the time for their daily call with Isabella drew near, Alexander helped the boys complete their homework and prepare for dinner. The routine had become so natural that it was hard to remember how overwhelming these responsibilities had seemed in the early days of Isabella's absence. At exactly 7 o'clock, Alexander's phone rang with Isabella's call, and he watched his sons' faces light up as their mother's image appeared on the screen. She was seated in the sitting room of her Swiss cottage, the familiar backdrop that had become synonymous with these precious family connections. "Hello, my darling boys," Isabella said, her voice warm with love and genuine happiness at seeing their faces. "Tell me about your day. What adventures did you have?" William immediately launched into an enthusiastic description of his block castle project, holding up his creation for his mother to admire through the camera. Isabella responded with appropriate amazement and encouragement, asking detailed questions about his construction techniques and suggesting additions he might consider. James shared news about a successful presentation he had given at school about the solar system, describing his classmates' questions and his teacher's positive feedback. Isabella listened attentively, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated her continued investment in his academic progress and personal growth. As the conversation continued, Alexander marveled once again at Isabella's ability to remain fully present and engaged in their children's lives despite the distance and her own challenges. She remembered details from previous conversations, celebrated their successes, and provided comfort and guidance for their concerns. When it was Alexander's turn to speak with Isabella privately, the boys settled nearby with books and quiet activities, giving their parents the opportunity for adult conversation while remaining close enough to feel included in the family connection. "How are you really doing?" Isabella asked, her question carrying the weight of genuine concern and intimate understanding. "Better than I expected," Alexander answered honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but we're finding our rhythm. The boys are remarkable, and I think we're all stronger than we knew we could be." Isabella smiled, her relief evident even through the video connection. "I'm so proud of all of you. I know this isn't the life any of us would have chosen, but I can see that you're not just surviving, you're actually thriving in some ways." Alexander nodded, recognizing the truth in her observation. "What about you? How are you really doing?" "I'm finding peace I didn't expect," Isabella replied thoughtfully. "It's different from the happiness I knew with you and the boys, but it's real and meaningful. I miss you all terribly, but I'm also discovering parts of myself that got lost somewhere in the years of royal duties and public obligations." Their conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from practical family matters to their deepest thoughts about their relationship and their individual journeys of growth and adaptation. When they finally ended the call, Alexander felt the familiar mixture of gratitude for the connection and sadness at its conclusion that had become part of his daily experience. As he tucked his sons into their beds and completed the evening routines that had become second nature, Alexander reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from their family's greatest challenge. They had discovered reserves of strength, depths of love, and possibilities for growth that might never have been revealed under normal circumstances. The love story of Alexander and Isabella had not ended with her departure for Switzerland. Instead, it had evolved into something deeper and more intentional, a testament to the power of commitment and the resilience of the human heart. Their farewell had been tearful and heartbreaking, but it had also been the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary love story, one that would inspire millions who witnessed their grace in the face of unimaginable challenges. Standing at his bedroom window, looking out at the gardens where he and Isabella had walked together on that last morning, Alexander felt not only the pain of missing her, but also the deep satisfaction of knowing that their love had proven stronger than circumstances, distance, and time. Tomorrow would bring another day of single parenting, royal duties, and the careful management of a life divided between two countries, but it would also bring them one day closer to their next reunion, and one day further along in their remarkable journey of love, commitment, and hope.